Hi guys, my name is Sanjay Gupta. I'm a consultant cardiologist, and today I wanted to do a video for those people who have atrial fibrillation and who've been told that they need to go on blood thinning medication, but the patients themselves are reluctant or apprehensive about going on blood thinners. Okay, and this is not uncommon. I get a ton of people where people come to me and they say that the doctor is saying that I need to go on these tablets, but I really don't want to take them. And so I thought I would do a video to try and discuss some interesting points which may help you make your mind up and make you more comfortable about your decision-making process. Okay, so the first thing to say is blood thinners don't really thin your blood. All right, it's a misnomer. Doctors use it because it's the easy thing to do, but actually what these medications do is they stop your blood from clotting as quickly, and therefore they should strictly be referred to as anticoagulants. Because you take these medications does not mean that you're walking around with thin blood as such. Number two, Afib, atrial fibrillation, is associated with strokes, and if you take an anticoagulant, you reduce your risk of stroke by 60%. Okay? Aspirin is not an anticoagulant, and at most will only reduce the risk by a measly 20%. And therefore, the choice in terms of anticoagulation should be between taking an anticoagulant or not taking an anticoagulant. Aspirin is not really a halfway house as such. It's not an effective halfway house. So aspirin is a waste of time in this setting. So you either choose to be on a proper anticoagulant or you choose to be on nothing at all. Now, remember, a lot of people try and base whether they're going to have a stroke or not on how they feel, okay? How you feel and whether you have a stroke or not are two completely unrelated things. You can feel great and then one day out of the blue you can have a stroke, or you can feel grotty all the time and never have a stroke. So you should not base your decision to take something that covers your future risk on how you feel. Okay, just because I feel well doesn't mean I won't get hit by a car when I go outside. Just because I feel terrible doesn't mean that I will definitely get hit by a car when I go outside. So similarly, you should not base the decision to wear a seat belt when you get into your car on how you're feeling outside, when you're outside your car. So it's really important to base that in mind. It is to bear that in mind when you're thinking of whether to go on anticoagulants or not. Number three, strokes in atrial fibrillation are caused by comorbidities that you carry, not by the atrial fibrillation itself. They're caused by the comorbidities in combination with your age and in combination with the atrial fibrillation, but not just by the atrial fibrillation itself. The risk of strokes is based on by calculating your CHADS-2 VASC score. And if you get a chance, do watch my other videos on Afib and you'll understand this. And the higher the score, the greater the risk of strokes. In the UK, currently, if you have a CHADS-2 VASC score of greater than or equal to 1 if you're a man, or greater than or equal to 2 if you're a woman, it is recommended that you go on anticoagulants for life. It doesn't really matter whether you are in AFib all the time or not, the risk is the same. Once AFib has been diagnosed once, if your CHADS-2 VASC score is high enough, you should go on it is recommended that you go on an anticoagulant, and those values are greater than or equal to 1 if you're a man, and greater than or equal to if you're a woman. Okay, so the question is, so when I've given you this information, now the thing is, well, okay, you're faced now with this decision as to whether to go on an anticoagulant or not, and there are two major problems that tend to put people off going on anticoagulants. Okay, the first and foremost concern that people have when they're contemplating going on an anticoagulant is the risk of bleeding, because the anticoagulant causes the blood not to clot as quickly. Of course, there is a bigger risk of bleeding. All right, and that could be bleeding because there is an injury. So, for example, you go out, you get hit by a car, you've sustained an injury, a hole has been created, the blood will not clot, and the blood seeps out of that hole. Or the other possibility is a spontaneous bleed, i.e., there is no real insult as such, but just out of the blue, bleeding starts happening within the body. Okay, so that's one of the major concerns people have who don't want to go on anticoagulants. What if I bleed? And the second concern a lot of people have is the hassle. Because if you go on an anticoagulant, it may cause side effects, it may be an inconvenience. People who go on warfarin have to have regular blood tests, which is a real hassle. So I think what we have to do when you're trying to contemplate why you don't want anticoagulants, because once you have to work that out in your own mind, why don't you want to have the anticoagulant if your risk is high enough? Okay, if it is because it's a hassle and may cause side effects, then there's some good news. All right, not everyone gets side effects. If you do get side effects, most are reversible. It is likely also that you can switch to a different anticoagulant and that may not cause the same side effects. We now have 5 good anticoagulants available: warfarin, dabigatran, apixaban, rivaroxaban, edoxaban. So you have a choice of different anticoagulants, and if you're unfortunate enough to have side effects with one, say hair loss or something like that, you can come off it, and that doesn't mean that the hair loss will continue. The hair loss will stop, and you can go on another anticoagulant, and that may not cause the same side effects. So I wouldn't let the idea that you may get side effects put you off. You should try, and if you do get side effects, then that's another matter. One can reconsider. But just the concern of possible side effects shouldn't put you off. Now, the second thing is the hassle of having regular blood tests. There is undoubtedly a major issue having regular blood tests if you go on warfarin, but the newer agents, the NOACs, the dabigatran, apixaban, edoxaban, rivaroxaban, those agents, you don't need regular blood tests. So you need some blood tests initially, but after that you just take them like any other tablet, 1 tablet or 2 tablets daily, and that's it. So I wouldn't let that put you off as well when you're going. Now, if you're worried about bleeding, then it's important to realize the following things, okay? Number 1, if you take a population of patients with Afib and treated them with warfarin for 18 months, then you will prevent a stroke in 1 in every 25 patients. And yes, 1 in 384 patients will suffer a significant bleed in the brain. But you can see that you do benefit. 1 in 25 patients will benefit, and 1 in 384 patients will come to harm. So clearly, the benefits outweigh the risk. Okay, and although the risk of bleeding is generally low, but does increase with the comorbidities you carry, much like the risk of stroke increasing with the comorbidities you carry. So, if you carry more comorbidities, then simply by working on your comorbidities, you can reduce your risk of bleeding on the anticoagulant. So, if you drink excessive alcohol, cutting down on alcohol intake. If you have high blood pressure, controlling the blood pressure. If you're taking other tablets which could thin your blood or which could affect your clotting, like aspirin, etc., coming off them will significantly reduce your risk of bleeding. A good lifestyle is one of the best things you can do. So exercise, good sleep, reduce stress, good diet. These will all reduce your risk of complications on the anticoagulant. Number 3, a lot of people seem to think that anticoagulants would cause more bleeding compared to aspirin. This is not true. The risk of bleeding with the newer agents is probably no more than aspirin. In fact, there was a study called the Averroes study where they compared apixaban with aspirin, and they found that there was no significant increase in bleeding with apixaban compared to aspirin. So the idea that in some ways these are more dangerous than aspirin is not true to my mind, and has been proven in one study with apixaban at least. So the risk of bleeding is not really any greater than with aspirin. Most bleeding that tends to occur consists of minor bleeding, which will settle spontaneously. The half-life of these newer medications in NOACs, the apixaban, rivaroxaban, dabigatran, edoxaban, is short, and therefore just not taking a dose will allow the bleeding to settle down. The new agents have a 50% less likelihood of causing a spontaneous bleed in the brain compared to warfarin. So they're even safer. They're 50% safer than warfarin in terms of causing bleeding in the brain. So that's another thing to put your mind at ease about the risk of bleeding. Some people get put off by the fact that what if I bleed? There's no reversal agent, etc. Well, actually, 2 of these agents have a very effective reversal agent. If you're on warfarin, you can be given vitamin K, and that will reverse the effects of warfarin relatively quickly. If you're on dabigatran, you can take something called idarucizumab, which is a reversal agent which works extremely effectively. Okay, and the other 3 agents, apixaban, rivaroxaban, edoxaban, will have a reversal agent probably towards the end of next year. If, despite all that, you're still worried about taking an anticoagulant, another option that you could consider is something called a left atrial appendage occluder device. It is known that the majority of clots that form within the heart because of as a consequence of atrial fibrillation and its comorbidities occur in an area called the left atrial appendage, which is a beak-shaped structure in the atrium. And that's where the blood accumulates and it doesn't move, and it can cause a clot to form there. So you can have a mechanical procedure done to block this. Okay, this is done through keyhole, and you can actually put a little device that blocks the appendage. And if you block the appendage, then any clot that forms within the appendage won't get dislodged, and this means that the risk of strokes is greatly reduced. So that's also possible. Now, increasingly, this is not being offered on the NHS, but there are some private centers still doing this procedure. It is also worth knowing that currently we are slowly beginning to acknowledge that maybe in those people who score very low in their CHADS-2 VASC score, they score high enough to be considered for anticoagulation, but not really high. So say if you had a CHADS-2 VASC score of 1 as a man, and if you had a CHADS-2 VASC score of 2 as a woman, at this point in time, most people would recommend anticoagulation. But we are now beginning to realize that perhaps we're overestimating the risks of stroke in that group, and the European Society of Cardiology recently produced guidance, and they have now said that anticoagulation should be considered in male patients with a CHADS-2 VASC score of 1, but recommended in male patients with a CHADS-2 VASC score of 2. So they're recommending it in a slightly higher CHADS-2 VASC of 2 rather than 1. But they're still saying consider it, but we definitely recommend it if your CHADS-2 VASC score is 2 if you're a man and 3 if you're a woman. Okay, so they've just moved that threshold up. So if you're on the cusp and you don't fancy taking an anticoagulant, then you can speak to your doctor and say, well, the current European Society guidance say that I'm still just borderline. Do I really need to go on it? The answer is, well, probably not, but as soon as you hit 65 or as soon as you get older, you probably will need to. So it is, if it were my family member, I would try and reassure them that actually, you know, a lot of their concerns about taking an anticoagulant are probably unjustified, and I would try and persuade them to take an anticoagulant. But if they were just on the cusps where they really didn't want to take, and their scores were low, so a man with a CHADS-2 VASC of 1 and a woman with a CHADS-2 VASC of 2, it would not be unreasonable to say, okay, let's just wait a little while, but just bear in mind that as you get older, we probably will have to start it anyway, so why not now? So I hope this was helpful, particularly for those people who are concerned about going on anticoagulation. It's not as terrible as it sounds. I hope this is reassuring for you. Thank you so much for your kindness. Thank you so much for the great words of support. I'm going to start doing a Facebook Live session once every week. So if you wanted to come and ask me any questions and interact with me on my Facebook Live sessions, I'm going to try and do them once a week. So come along to my Facebook page. The way you do so is type in York Cardiology 1, York Cardiology 1 in the search engine, and you should find me. Equally well, you can come and visit me on my website, yorkcardiology.co.uk, and my email address is yorkcardiology@gmail.com. Okay, thank you so much for listening. I hope this was useful to you. Please, please, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting, and do let me know if you'd like me to do any particular videos in the future. It's really important to me that I give you what you want, but also it fills me with a great deal of happiness when I see my channel grow and more people coming and more people subscribing. So if you get a chance to share my videos, please do. I would really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. All the best.